This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech players in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
Hey guys, welcome back to Breaking Banks Europe. I am Matteo Rizzi, the executive producer of the show. Today we talk about Morocco. This is episode 258. Is an ecosystem zoom in, and I welcome my friend Yassine. Yassine, welcome to Breaking Banks Europe.
Hi, Matteo. Great to be here.
So this is, it feels like a second round of an amazing conversation that we already had in your podcast. And, shout out to Yassine because he built up a very professional series of conversation, the Pan-African with different entrepreneurs, and you can find the link to our chat. We will put in this profile. But Yassine, for the people who don't know you, please give us a brief intro on yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matteo, first of all, for the invite, and thank you as well for the introduction. So I'm an entrepreneur immersed in the world of emerging technologies. So that goes from blockchain technology to AI. I'm specifically working on leveraging emerging technologies to build better systems. Recently, I got into the fintech world where I built a platform that allows European investors to access unique investment opportunities in Morocco, to offer them better yields and allow them to invest in euros and collect their return on investments also in euros. And as you said, I have a podcast called Unchained that covers a panel of different topics related to emerging technologies and personal growth.
Thank you, Yassine. So the reason why we thought that talking to you was good enough to get the pulse of the Moroccan ecosystem is because we met at GITEX, where I'm a regular speaker, as you know, and so are you. And you're an entrepreneur. You introduced me to a bunch of players in a country that are like UM6P, who are like super instrumental, for the digital development and digital transformation of the country. But let's start from the beginning. So, as an entrepreneur, you can certainly give us your perspective on both the easiness of doing business in Morocco, as well as when you get into the fundraising mode, I suppose it got easier, in the past years or so. When you see like 25,000 people, coming to GITEX, you can see that even if it's not fully fintech, but the ecosystem is really vibrant. So is that the case?
Well, it's definitely the case. Morocco is currently in a unique position because we can see that there is a strong dynamic in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, and we can later do a focus specifically on the fintech sector. But in general, we can see that the entrepreneurship ecosystem is currently thriving, or at least the trend is moving forward at a quick pace. And that we can see it actually at different levels. So first of all, we can see that there is a shift in the mindset, on the culture, especially of younger generations. And that's very impressive to see, because where for older generations, what was actually valued was to have a stable job in a multinational, and that was what was encouraged by society. We can currently see that for younger generations, the ideals that they hold is entrepreneurship, launching a startup, launching a company, doing an exit, aiming for the stars, and so on. And we can see that this is the types of stories that are currently being valued. So this is a strong thing, and this is quite important because it's at the basis of everything that happens afterwards. And also what's quite interesting is that there is a shift and a strong incentives from the governments and entities to encourage startups and to give them all they need so they would succeed. And we can, for instance, see that in a plan that was recently shared by the Moroccan government, which is the Digital Plan of 2030, that aims to position Morocco as a leading country in Africa in digital transformation. And entrepreneurship and startups were placed at center of this strategy. And so Morocco is aiming to go from approximately 300 startups to more than 3,000 startups by 2030. So that's 10x in a few years, which is a strong ambitions, but it also shows where the country is aiming to go, and also to have by 2030 at least 2 unicorns, because so far there is no unicorn in Morocco, and so to offer the startups the infrastructure that they need so they can scale and they can grow and reach the unicorn status. And so we can see actually that currently in Morocco, the trend, as I was saying, is going in the right direction. For instance, this is something that we can see through some metrics, like for instance, the total amount that was raised by Moroccan startups. I think in 2021, it was a bit above $20 million for maybe 20 or more startups. And this year, it actually got up to $40 million and even more for more startups than we had in the previous years, which shows that there is a trend, a positive trend. So it is undeniable that Morocco is going in the right direction. Of course, there are still some obstacles and issues that Moroccan startups are facing, but it's definitely, I think, the right time for entrepreneurs and startups to be launched in Morocco. And something that is also quite important and positions Morocco in a very good position is that it's actually geographically positioned located in a strategic position. It's literally at the crossroad of Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, which means that Moroccan startups can aim for these different markets. And that's, by the way, also what makes it interesting for fintech startups, because there is room for innovation to facilitate transactions between these countries, to build better systems, and so on.
So it was you actually, without knowing it, anticipated what I was going to ask next. So Morocco is literally maybe the country in Africa that has a very special, positioning. So everyone is talking about, when we talk about financial inclusion programs and funding, we all call about sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm talking about things that for you seems trivial, but maybe for, a good chunk of our listeners, might not be, right? So there are a lot of people who do not consider North Africa, Africa, in the sense that they don't put it in the same basket of the way it operates or the way that financial inclusion has to be pushed. And it is true as well that also culturally, a country like Morocco, who is francophone, but also multicultural, but also a very strong influence, from Europe, because, not only because of the proximity, but because of, the very strong relationship with France, for example, that build a lot of bridges. It's at the same time, it looks like an opportunity, but also like a challenge, because if I was, a Moroccan entrepreneur, it's almost like I have too many choices and I need to focus, right? So is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I would even go beyond that and say that it's hard for Moroccan entrepreneurs to focus and, for instance, to know in which markets they would launch their startups, because they have too many options at their disposal. A lot of Moroccan people did their studies, for instance, in Europe, some of them in America, and so on. So we can see that, for instance, a lot of talented Moroccan entrepreneurs are tempted to launch their startups, for instance, in other markets rather than do it in Morocco. Of course, there is an emotional incentive to do it in Morocco. But I would say that they're highly tempted, for instance, to do it in other countries that offer more funding, that offer maybe better opportunities, that with for bigger markets and so on. And it's also
it would
true.
be interesting.
Mhm.
Sorry to interrupt you, but it would be interesting
Yeah.
to figure out, even in France alone, Moroccan co-founders of French startups, they might be raised more than $40 million alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I don't have the metric. There are certainly a lot of them, and a lot of them that I know personally. So it's true that for many, for instance, specifically French startups, you have at least one Moroccan person involved, maybe not in as a co-founder, but involved within the team and so on. And that's actually strange because what we can see, a current trend that we can see, and that is actually quite recent, is that a lot of entrepreneurs that had their first successful experience are now deciding to come back to Morocco with their experience, with their knowledge, and to launch a project or to mentor aspiring entrepreneurs and so on. So it's true that it's a bad thing in a sense where maybe so those same entrepreneurs could have launched the same ideas and the same projects within Morocco. But it's actually also a good thing because these entrepreneurs, once they have their experience and they learn from very dynamic markets and so on, they're later able to launch their projects in Morocco and support the ecosystem.
So if we focus a second on the financial institutions, both like banks, but also insurances and financial players in general, how have you seen them evolving? In the past, I want to say 5 or 6 years is when I consider that Morocco's fintech scene sort of woke up, as a as a follow-on, country, but potentially with a leadership position in the continent, right? But I'm just curious about, are we still in the phase where fintechs are seen as competitors, threat, etc., or the full collaboration mode, which is the clear way to go, how do you say it, sacred and sealed, from the different ecosystems, has already taken place?
Yeah, it's actually quite the opposite. There is actually a collaboration between incumbents and fintech startups, and because there is actually a synergy and they're actually quite complementary. So this is the direction that things are currently taking, and for different reasons. So first of all, fintech is one of the sectors that has the highest potential in Morocco. And the reason is that it's one of the areas where there is the much bigger needs. I think more than 60% of Moroccans are unbanked or underbanked, which is actually quite high. And the reason is that the Moroccan economy is dependent on the informal activities. And there's also a cultural resistance or maybe reticence to actually access banks and to have a bank and to interact with banks and so on.
When you say unbanked, also without any form of even mobile money, or just a bank account?
No bank account or even mobile money. So this is
Okay.
so that's actually both. But at the same time, we can see that the Moroccan people, even in rural areas and so on, have adopted technology and, for instance, social media and have smartphones and so on. And also in terms of internet coverage, Morocco is one of the best countries in Africa. And the reason is that the incumbents and the traditional banks were not able to satisfy the demands and also to build solutions that could be easily adopted by a certain type of people. And this is where fintechs can, for instance, fill in this gap, where they can, for instance, do this last mile and build solutions that are more adapted, that are easier to use, that are more accessible, and so on. That's also why we can see that there are some collaborations between young fintechs and incumbents to work together and to build solutions together. There are also a few programs that were launched by Moroccan entities in, for instance, the banking or the insurance sector to support and to promote entrepreneurship and to build innovative projects to satisfy specific demands. So yeah, that's the thing. We can see that it's currently going towards the direction of collaboration rather than the opposite.
So, and could you say the same thing about the regulators? Because Morocco, I know for a fact that it has at least two, if not three, different regulators. Because I know there is one for insurance and there is one for the financial sector. And you of all entrepreneurs know it for sure, because the startup you are building requires a little bit of innovation, as far as the investment, and even like the fractional ownership or the tokenization of the asset has to be involved. So how did you see the role of the regulators evolve in the past years?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. It's also something I think there is specific news that is actually quite recent that I can share, and that also shows the direction that things are taking, and it's actually related to the regulation of cryptocurrencies in Morocco. So this is a very sensitive topic in Morocco, and the reason is that I think in 2017 cryptocurrencies were actually explicitly banned. But at the same time, when we see the adoption of cryptocurrencies within Morocco, we see that it's actually ranked very high in Africa and around the world. I think Morocco is in the top 50 countries around the world in terms of adoption of cryptocurrencies. And it's in the top 5 or even top 3 in Africa after Nigeria and South Africa. And recently, the Moroccan central bank, so Bank al Maghrib, announced that they are currently working on the regulation of cryptocurrencies, and this is something that that is quite recent, and the regulations will be published certainly in the upcoming months or next year, which shows that there is a desire from regulators to also regulate the ecosystem and to give startups the right means to actually do things in a more secure way. So I think the example of cryptocurrencies is a very good one, but this also applies, for instance, to other types of sectors, like for instance in insurance and fintech in general. There is certainly room for improvements. One obstacle that Moroccan startups are usually facing is bureaucracy. But this is not only the case for Morocco. It's of course also the case for other countries. But the Moroccan system has inherited, for instance, or Morocco has inherited a bureaucratic system that is sometimes a bit too slow and uncertain for startups. And I personally think that once, for instance, things will be less bureaucratic and so on, this is where we will see a spur and an emergence of, for instance, of players, as we've seen, for instance, in Europe or in the US.
So, we were talking before about UM6P, which is, one of the best funded and, at the core, of the innovation and digital transformation of the country. And one of the main things that UM6P is investing in, and you can maybe talk a little bit about the institutions and why I'm mentioning it, because you're actually the one who made the intro to me as well. One of the main things UM6P is investing in is talent, right? And the Moroccan universities in general, they are probably the closest, together with South Africa, to European education in terms of level, teachers that are importing in, Francophone teachers coming from France. So there are a lot of good contamination, in the education system. So how this is reflecting into the technology adoption. So, how does being so mindful in thinking about talent has developed, for example, a good AI strategy, for the country? And I know that this is something you have been talking about in your podcast, so you have a lot of touch points. So I want to basically let's talk a little bit about how does Morocco care about the talents and how this has influenced the more technological side of the innovation, and where do you see the trends?
Yeah, I think the thing is, talent, I think, is one of the strengths of Morocco as a country. And I think it's one of the resources that positions Morocco as one of the leading countries in Africa related for everything related, for instance, to technology and so on. So unlike other countries that may have, for instance, more resources and so on, I like to think that the most precious resource of Morocco are its talents, and it's actually quite true. When we see, for instance, all of the innovation and all of, for instance, the talents that are working even at multinationals and international companies and so on, we can obviously see that there is an effort and there is that Moroccan talents have sometimes an edge, and it's actually related to what we've been discussing before. Due to its geographical location. The thing is, Moroccan people, as when they're young, they're usually learning different languages, so they're exposed to different cultures and so on. And traditionally, Morocco is, as a country, very open to the world, which means that usually the youth in Morocco is very interested by what's happening around the world and the trends and so on. That also, of course, applies to technology. And we can see, for instance, that Moroccan people, and especially the youth, are very interested about everything related to technology. That's also why, as we've been saying, in terms of adoption of cryptocurrencies, Morocco is very well positioned, although the regulation was not necessarily following for many years. And that also applies to other technologies, like, for instance, green energy, and more recently with AI, and so on. Recently, we can see that there are some initiatives that were launched by institutions, like, for instance, universities, UM6P being one of them, but it's not the only one, to encourage Moroccan talents and to give them all of the resources and needs that they have so they can thrive and they can excel and compete internationally at different levels. And UM6P, as one of the leading Moroccan universities, is focusing specifically, for instance, on emerging tech. There are a few initiatives, for instance, that are focused specifically on fintechs, others on, for instance, on AI, artificial intelligence. And we can already see that it's actually starting to have an impact over Morocco as a country and how it is evolving. We can, for instance, see it within the entrepreneurship ecosystem, where we can see that, as we've been saying earlier, people are now valuing entrepreneurship, and specifically in technology entrepreneurship, to launch their startup and so on. But in general, we can see that there is an interest for technology, even in terms, for instance, of consumption of content on social media and so on. We see that everything related to technology is actually quite valued, which is quite good, yeah.
So you were talking before about bureaucracy, which is indeed, one of the killers, of any form of innovation. My curiosity to be, and also to be shared with the rest of the listeners, is if today, there is this nomad entrepreneurship sort of concept, right, where people are actually going into favorable places to do business that also, happens to have a lower cost of living. So, and as you know well, I live in Lisbon, and Lisbon is actually one of these countries in the European scene when a lot of entrepreneurs are coming because there is a very favorable and quick way, of becoming an entrepreneur. Is that the case for Morocco?
Yeah, it is. It definitely is, and it's also one trend that we're currently seeing in tourism. So where traditionally tourism was mainly attracting people that wanted, for instance, to discover the Moroccan culture, the traditions of Morocco, and so on, we can see that increasingly the entrepreneurs and digital nomads that decide to relocate in Morocco or to spend weeks or months in Morocco for the reasons that you've mentioned, because the cost of living are actually quite low. It's a country that is very stable, both economically and politically. It's very close to Europe, which means I think from Portugal, it's I think 40 minutes from France, depending on the city. It can go from 2 hours to 2 hours and a half. So it's actually quite close to Europe with flights that are actually quite affordable.
Absolutely.
And the weather is and the weather is quite good. The food is quite good. People speak French. Many people also speak English and so on. So which attracts a new type of tourists, younger generations that are looking for locations where they can work remotely and at the same time enjoy their life and discover a new culture.
And by the way, and I want to shout out to your own initiative. Actually, when we talk about tourism, PropTech is also one of the sector that I see, and your initiative is certainly a witness of that. I see it like a PropTech innovation crossed with the cryptocurrency sort of future regulation having a great potential in the country, don't you think? And I know you're going to say yes, but let's develop a little bit. And you can also tell us a little bit what your own startup does.
Yeah, of course, and I absolutely agree. That's also why I'm very interested about this specific value or the value that we're aiming to bring. The thing is, it's all about how the market is evolving and the trend, where the trend is going. The thing is, in Europe, the market is mainly saturated, and I'm talking specifically about the real estate market. It's already developed. Of course, there are new projects being developed and so on, but it's
the upside is certainly not the same. Exactly,
it's highly saturated, and we can also see it, for instance, for the yields, where the yields of real estate in Europe are very low, usually around 4%, maybe 5%, depending, of course, on the city and the countries. The thing is with emerging countries or in the developed world is that it's emerging, it's developing, which means that there is still room for growth, there is still room for new projects and so on. And the yields are usually way more interesting than what one can find, for instance, in Europe, where prices are high, prices of lands are high, prices of labor are also high, and so on. What places Morocco in a unique position is that it's both a developing country or emerging country, depending on the definition that we use. But unlike other countries, for instance, in Africa, it's politically stable and economically stable, and which makes it very interesting from the investment standpoint. And so for investors that are looking for new investment opportunities that offer higher yields, but that also are quite stable, as it is usually the case for real estate, Morocco is very attractive from that standpoint. And that's exactly what I'm currently working on, is to basically have a platform that would offer European investors the possibility to invest in unique real estate properties. When I say unique, meaning that they're usually not off market, not available to retail investors. And we're specifically focusing on the hospitality sector because it's one of the sectors that offers the highest yields and where there is certainly room for growth for the upcoming years, considering that Morocco is co-organizing the 2030 World Cup, FIFA World Cup with Portugal and Spain. So yeah, it's certainly a sector that will be growing in the following years.
Yeah, actually, it's not. It's a bit unusual because I'm not like even despite being Italian, I'm not an exacerbated football fan. But I must say that you actually made me think when we met about the fact that 2030 is for the countries where we both live is going to be like a milestone, and a lot of development and also I believe opportunities will be driven by the world. Probably Morocco is going to be one of the countries going to take advantage the most of it. Don't you think?
It is. It definitely is, and I think there is actually a symbolic dimension to this specific year, 2030, and also the events. Of course, it's a big event, very international, a lot of visitors and so on. But Morocco has defined it, for instance, as a milestone to reach a new level. And earlier in our discussion, I've mentioned, for instance, the digital plan, which also was defined for the 2030 milestone. Many projects, for instance, that were fixed for 2030, infrastructure that will be built by this year and so on. So definitely Morocco is aiming to reach a different level, higher level by this year, and with the FIFA World Cup being the highlighting the events that will basically allow hopefully Moroccans to celebrate it. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, you guys came pretty close, in the last in the last cup.
Yeah.
Yassine, listen, our time is up. The good news is that we know that at least we meet once a year, at our usual gathering. But I'm actually planning on visiting before, so I really hope we'll see each other soon. For now, thank you very much for being with us and highlight some of the very special peculiarities of this wonderful ecosystem, which is Morocco. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matteo. Really enjoyed the discussion and being part of the podcast, and we'll definitely meet in Europe or when you'll be in Morocco. So let's keep in touch.
Okay, guys, and this is a wrap.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with Fintech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.